Okay, good morning or good afternoon. We are doing a Year 10 lesson today, but you might also want to use it if you are Year 11 and you're wanting to recap on America. Our lesson today is why did Wall Street crash in 1929? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you our normal lessons and we will go through, and I want you to pause it and answer some of the questions with pen and paper, get some notes down. That will be the most effective way of doing this. So hopefully we should be able to see that now. So our title is Why Did Wall Street Crash in 1929? And our keywords, which I want you to come back to at the end of the lesson, are shareholder, investor, stock market, dividend, and tariffs. Our other big question is who was most affected by the Great Depression? And the skill that we're looking at is cause and consequence. We're looking at what caused this Wall Street crash. So to start off with, just so we've got some kind of routine, just as we do at the start of lessons, I'm going to leave this slide up. I want you to pause it and I want you to have a go at answering these questions. It should take you no more than 5 minutes. Try and finish these sentences. So first one, African Americans. What can we say of what we have learned about African Americans and the African American experience during the 1920s? Secondly, immigrants to the USA in the 1920s. What can we say about that? We've had plenty of lessons on that, so maybe think if you can how you would finish that sentence. And then finally, the American economy boomed in the 1920s because. Okay, so now pause the video, finish these sentences, and then we'll go through some answers in a moment. Okay, hopefully you've paused and had a go at those. Remember, at this point, we can't monitor you really closely. So the people who are going to be really successful during this time are people who are self-motivated, people who are pushing it. So if you didn't do it, please make sure that we are pushing ourselves and trying our best during these remote learning lessons. Okay, so some answers for us. You could say something like African Americans faced a lot of prejudice in the 1920s in America. For example, the Jim Crow laws. We looked at this idea of segregation, of African Americans being kept separate from white Americans. Jim Crow, remember, was this like cartoony type character, it was another way of insulting African Americans. Secondly, immigrants to the USA in the 1920s faced increasing discrimination. For example, the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti, the two Italian Americans who were killed for a crime they probably didn't commit. You could also talk about the fact they had to face things like a reading test, had to be able to read 40 words English before they were allowed, or the fact that it got a lot harder. By 1924, only 150,000 migrants were coming into America. And then finally, there are plenty of reasons for this, but you could say the American economy boomed in the 1920s because of millions of people investing in the stock market. This was called speculating or playing the stock market. And obviously that applies to what we're looking at today, because the stock market and people putting their money into stocks and shares all fell apart in 1929. So as a recap, this is how the stock market works. Okay, so to set up a company, you need money. So you're going to need money for wages, equipment, land, and so on. Now, you might not have all of that money to hand straight away. So most companies get money from investors. They will have to ask people to give them some money so that they can get started. Okay, those investors, you've seen this on Dragon's Den, they'll say, right, I will give you £100,000, but I want 10% of the company or 50% of the company. Those investors, they become shareholders. They share part of the company in return for their money. And a shareholder makes money in two ways. One, every time that a company makes profit, then a shareholder is given some of that profit. Okay, so if you own part of a company, say you own 50% and they make £100,000 profit in a year, then you would get 50% of that profit because you own 50% of the company. So you get £50,000. The other way of making money is if you sell your share for a higher price than what you paid for it. So you could invest in a company, let's say it's in the 1970s and 1980s, you come across this little known company called Apple. You think, oh, what a cool name, I like apples. So you decide that you're going to invest in this little computer company, and at the time it's really, really small. You then come to look at your stocks and shares by the time we get to today, and by the time we get into the 21st century, and Apple is the biggest company, one of the biggest companies in the world, it's going to be worth so much more, so you could make a massive profit. Okay, so that's the two ways that a shareholder makes money. One, by receiving a dividend, a share of the profits, and two, by selling their share for more than they bought it for. And shares are bought and sold on the stock market. Stock is just another word for share. And in America, as you can see on the picture from New York, America's stock market is on a place called Wall Street. Okay, so we've had a lesson on this. If you're with me in year 10, we have looked at how the stock market works and how people started to get involved in it. And we're going to look at how this fell apart. But before we do, here's the background. This handsome fella, top right, is Herbert Hoover. So as we've looked at, the American economy is absolutely booming. They have really benefited from World War One, partly because the fighting wasn't in their country, and also because some of the European countries they needed loans, and they also needed huge amounts of food to be prepared for them. So they've benefited from World War One and become the most powerful economy in the world. Herbert Hoover, top right, he is the Republican candidate. Republicans have been in power, and they have got this idea of laissez-faire. This was one of the causes of the boom that we looked at. This idea that you just let people make money. You don't need to interfere. People will just make money. The economy will run along smoothly. And nobody doubted that the Republicans would win. It was just seen as a foregone conclusion that they would definitely win. And he did. Hoover won by an absolute landslide, and everything seemed perfect. And one of his statements was, he said, "We in America today are nearer to the final triumph over poverty than ever before. The poor man is vanishing from among us." So they had such optimism in the 1920s during this boom period that everybody was going to benefit from America being rich, and there was going to be no poverty at all in America. Hoover, he said, Americans had more bathtubs, oil, furnaces, silk stockings, and bank accounts than any other country. So everything seemed rosy. Now, if you've had me for year 8, or if we've talked about things like the Wall Street crash with when we looked at the effect it had on Germany, then you might have heard me talk about Peaches. Okay, so imagine this company called Peaches, and imagine it's a company worth £1 million. Okay, now you really love peaches. You want to get involved in Peaches. You love a peach, so you want to invest in Peaches. You can't afford, however, to buy the whole company. Okay, you haven't got £1 million in the bank, but you decide that you're going to buy a little tiny part of it, a little tiny share, 0.1% of it. You've heard at this time that everyone is speculating and buying stocks, so you invest in Peaches because you love peaches so much. Now, Peaches is such a good company that other people want to buy stocks in Peaches. So the value of the company goes up to 10 million. Okay, so that company is making more profit, so you might gain more dividends because you own a very small part of it, but the company is becoming more valuable. The more valuable the company is, the more people want to buy stocks because they think things are going really, really well for Peaches. And then something bad happens. People start to realise that Peaches might not be a good company. Maybe the Peaches sells is not, then they're not as good as people thought before. They might even realise that they are selling rotten peaches. So when people think that the product isn't very good or the company isn't very good, people panic and start to sell off their stocks. And the difficulty is when a couple of people do that and they see that people are selling, then often everybody piles in and goes, right, we need to make sure that we get rid of our stocks in this company. Everybody starts to panic. And the fear is Peaches goes bankrupt and its employees lose their jobs. Okay, so people will lose their livelihood. And even worse, people don't just think that Peaches and the peaches that they're selling are rotten. They start to think that the whole stock market, the whole system might be rotten. Okay, I hope it's a really complex idea, but we're trying to explain it in a simple way. This idea that people lose confidence in it, and they feel that they have to sell all of their shares because they don't think that it's looking after their money in a good way. They think the whole system might be rotten. So 6 months later, because of that fear, we have the crash. So in October 1929, the Wall Street stock market crashes and the American economy goes into a period known as the Great Depression. Okay, as a result of that, millions of shares lost a lot of their value. People are panicking. They are wanting to get rid of their shares because they think they're going to lose all of their money. And because of that, people are so scared of losing their money, they stop spending money. Okay, we're probably in a little bit of a similar situation now, where people are so scared about their money not being worth anything that they may be spending less on other things. Okay, and that has a knock-on effect on the rest of the economy. Also, just as we saw with products, we looked at things like hire purchase, where people were borrowing money to buy products like cars and washing machines, but people had also borrowed money to buy shares, and now the shares are worthless. So you've got to find a way to pay this company or this bank back, but you've not got any money because your share is worthless. So people started to become bankrupt, and banks, because they've given out the loans, they started to go bankrupt as well. This graphic sort of shows you how bad things got in that really brief period of time. So just you can have a look at a couple of these companies. So something like, if we look at General Motors for instance here. So General Motors, the cost of one share in cents on the 3rd of September was 182 cents. Okay, so quite expensive. And then in the space of 2 months, it has dropped down to being worth 36 cents. So the company has massively reduced. Some of them are even more than this. Look at this one. The shares in radio, which we know was so popular during the early parts of the 1920s, shares in radio go from being worth 505 cents all the way down to being worth 28. So, main causes of the crash, okay, and if you've not already, I want you to be getting down some notes for this bit. So get a pen and paper. If you need to pause it, get a pen and paper and get down these ideas of the main causes of the crash. Remember, you can send any work in to us on the email addresses. I'll do that at the end. So 3 main causes of the Wall Street crash. The first one is overproduction. So not everyone could afford the products that are being made. But people are producing huge amounts because they feel that there's a huge demand. People feel that, like Hoover says, the good times are just going to keep on going. Everyone's getting rich. There's not going to be any more poverty in America. So they're producing loads of goods. Not everyone could afford them, and they're not able to sell them. They also can't sell those goods abroad because the government have set really high tariffs. Okay, remember, tariffs are like taxes that a government might put on its own products. So, for instance, if in America they're making Ford cars, in order to make it easier for American people to buy those, they will make it expensive to sell those abroad. Second reason is overconfidence. So as we've looked at, people thought that there was no way the stock market could fail. They thought it was a surefire way to make money. People ploughed all of their savings into it, and then before you know it, it had crashed. And what they didn't realise, and you still see this all the time, what they didn't realise is that stocks are only worth something if people want to buy it. If you put all of your money into something, let's say around the 2017 mark, you put all of your money into fidget spinners because you're like, these are they're the best thing going. These will never get boring. These will never get old. Now, all of your money that's gone into fidget spinners, looking back 3 years later, nobody wants to buy them anymore. They're worthless. Okay, so people thought they couldn't fail, and the stock market was an easy way to make money, and it wasn't. And the third one is panic. Once, as we looked at with Peaches, once one person sold their shares, everybody did. Everybody thought, right, I don't want to be left holding something that's worthless, so I'm going to sell it, even if actually the company was doing fine. Okay, and even though when the example we looked at with Peaches, that company was rotten, and there were lots of other companies that would have been doing really, really well, that were really well-run companies, but because people are losing confidence in the whole market, in the whole stock market, people are panicking and selling all of their shares. So they're the 3 main causes of the crash. Right, these are the questions that I want you to do. The first one is a 4-mark exam question. Okay, so think about your sentence starters. It's a simple question. Describe 2 causes of the Wall Street crash. So feel free to look back in both your books and to rewind this video to help you with that. Describe 2 causes of the Wall Street crash. For your sentence starters, you can just go with something like one cause of the Wall Street crash was, another one was. Okay, that is a really simple 4-mark question. You just need to give some evidence, and you need to develop it in order to get the marks. Secondly, is thinking forward to our next couple of lessons. So describe what you think will happen next. So what's going to happen to jobs? What's going to happen to living conditions? Okay, and there's no right or wrong answer for this. You might want to do some research, or you can just have a go at thinking about what the possible consequences are going to be of this crash. And thirdly, who do you think is going to be affected most? Do you think it will be shareholders, people who who own part of businesses? Will it be bank managers? Banks are going bankrupt at this point. Will it be the rich? Are rich people going to be hit hard? Farmers, factory workers, maybe people who are lower down the economic scale. How are they going to be affected? So maybe have a look down that list and explain how each of those will be affected in turn, and make a judgment on who you think is going to be affected the most. Now, in terms of emailing work, I'd love you to email it. If you're in my class, my year 10 class, I'd like you to email it to myself on the top one, rwilliams1@bluecoatbeechdale.com. If you have Mr. Peach or Mr. Mudd, their email addresses are also on the screen, and they will look over any work. You can send it over as Word documents. You can send it over as pictures that you've taken of your notes. If there's stuff for us to mark, we will happily do so. So, finally, your next lesson is how did the Great Depression impact people's lives? I cannot handle a stray apostrophe. So, impact people's. No, I'm absolutely right. Don't doubt yourself, Mr. Williams. You only have been off for a long time. Don't doubt yourself. How did the Great Depression impact people's lives? That's what we're going to be looking at. You might want to do some research. Have a look on BBC Bitesize. Look at the other the websites that are listed on the school website section for those doing home learning, and let us know how you get on. If you've got any questions, please do contact us on the email. All right, thanks ever so much. Bye bye.